Hello again, and welcome to the 5th episode of There Be Game. In a sort of follow-up to my last video, I'd like to talk briefly about some thoughts I had about my last character, namely the fact she was a paladin. Now, I believe paladins do get the short end of the stick from a great many people because they see lawful good as either an unachievable goal or a killjoy. I don't believe either of those are valid points of view to take, especially if you think about what the alignments mean on a philosophical level. What the main realization I came to about paladins was that they are very much a process-driven character insofar as that they are not about the result, but how you get to that process. At the end of the day, the paladin is ultimately directed to do the best good for the most number of people without any willful sacrifices or evil acts. At least evil in a self-interest level. This, to me, means that the paladin has to look for the best possible path. You have two townsmen arguing. They've got to go which one is right, which one is wrong. And yes, they have sense evil, so you can work out which one has the most evil intent at the point of time of the reading, but that's not the answer. The paladin needs to sit down with both parties and work out what the wrong is, how that wrong is a wrong, and then most importantly, attempt to rectify it. That process of investigation, of arriving into each town, listening to the problems and having a neutral mindset of letting each situation that you come into be without any overt bias from you as to which is good and which is bad. If it is the intelligent creatures of the forest that are attacking the village, I'd argue, depending on what type of paladin you're playing, you need to protect them rather than the people. You need to make the people of that village understand why they are being attacked. This process, this path that the paladin walks, can actually be very easy. Now, being challenged on this path is difficult because if you approach each situation without any bias, it can be quite easy to start reading into what the DM's doing and how he's running things. So you start being able to go, well, I've seen this thing kind of before, so I can guess that party A started it, but even then they were actually kind of innocent, so I'm going to give them some credit, and before you know, you start having what you need to avoid: bias. So I'm going to talk about paladins from a more game master perspective from now, because I've made my point. It is about the path. Now, to really test a paladin, I think what you need to do is present two different sides of an argument, both with rights, both with wrongs. That, let's just stick with two villagers arguing. One's attacked the other with a knife and seriously wounded him. If the attacker had discovered that the person he attacked was sleeping with his wife, he'd have what I think would be, at least for a medieval setting, quite an acceptable reason. Has he taken it too far? Yes. But it's, again, he's lost in his passions. You can defend that on some level. To further complicate this, what if instead of it just being one encounter, it was a repeated encounter and the wife was lying to this man? Well, then the wife deserves to be punished for this willful act of adultery that she's not willing to go I no longer want to be with you. And if we're running a medieval world, that's actually quite within the law, which, again, Paladins are sworn to uphold. I think, though, the higher the level, the more complex and intricate the situation needs to be. I mean, Paladins are by their natures going to be recognised as some form of knight, lesser nobility at a minimum, if not potentially through the course of the campaign ending up landowners in some form. Potentially even starting their own lance or small mercenary company. There's plenty that they can do to show their status. Now, the fact is, they say that rulers are between 8th and 9th level, knights are 5th level characters, which makes any sort of scaling quite hard to do. Because if you're expecting a knight at 5th level to be capable of commanding, let's say, a company of men, a small garrison, it's difficult. Not only because it can be hard to fit into a campaign, but because that type of command is by its nature difficult, and I believe worthy of being given to a paladin as part of their challenge. Running a company is difficult. Running a garrison is difficult. They need to dispense law. There will be standing orders in a military sense that have to be maintained. How do you strike the balance between the good-natured commander, which I'd argue you have to be in the case of a paladin? You need to care. You need to manage, and you need to be everybody's friend as well as leader. But you also need to be an officer, and depending on what you believe about command, officers are separate to their men. So you give them that as a challenge. If you give them a castle, you give them what goes with it, a village. How they handle that, how they handle law, how they handle the responsibilities of their status is important. You don't need to put a monkey on their back with the form of a cleric or an inquisitor from their respective order turning up to ensure they're doing good. That's somewhat insulting to the player, because you're saying, I don't trust you enough to act your role without supervision. But what you do need to do is to design a challenge that works on ensuring that they have to follow their own process, and they need to stay as neutral as they can in that process. Each time they slip up, don't hammer them for it, don't revoke their status, give them little nudges, make sure that it comes back to bite them, that they get accusations of bias and they then need to defend themselves, not with any roles, but in that process itself. This ends another video, and I hope you'll be watching again in the future.